I remind you, because I know I have it and I love it, reading today. You know, love. Any one of us who doesn't have love, who has blocks to be able to receiving love, is really like a bird who has its wings clipped. The whole concept of a bird is to be able to fly, to be able to soar through the airs and land at the top of trees, to land in the cliffs and build their nests and have families and be free to soar through the air. But when we have our heart pierced and we live in pain and agony outside of love, we're prevented, like the bird, from being able to soar, from being able to be in the kind of relationship with each other and with God Almighty that we were born and meant to be. Now there's many things that separate us from God. For God is love. Separate us from love is what I'm saying. So if I say separate us from love, I'm saying separate us from God. Sometimes it's as children who have been abused or neglected from childhood, never really learn what it's like to accept love. And they have to go through much training and understanding before they learn what it's like to be loved. Other people who have loved and have had children or spouses or parents, as Carol says, and they love them and that's taken away from them, sometimes abruptly, sometimes through natural death, but I'm usually thinking of through disaster or whatever. There's an extraordinary amount of pain, and when we live in pain, it's like living in a jail. We're prevented from being all we can be. W.M. Paul Young wrote a book called The Shack. Has anyone heard of that yet? Anyone read it? You've read it? It's a wonderful, absolutely wonderful book where really the premise, and I'm not saying I agree with all of his theology, that's not the point, but he's trying to help us understand how to come closer to God and develop a relationship that will free you from pain, from suffering, and allow you to soar like the birds. His fictional character starts off, Mac. He's going to take his children on a holiday on the Labor Day weekend, the long weekend, just before school. Unfortunately, his wife Nan is unable to come along. But the two boys, I think there was 9, 7, and the young girl of 5, are just excited and thrilled, and off they go into this trip somewhere, I forget where it is. And they're having an absolutely wonderful weekend, and they've met other campers with kids the same age, and things are just having a ball. And the weekend is coming to an end, and the two boys say, "Can't we go for just one more canoe ride?" And the father doesn't want them, but they beg, and you know what kids are like, they're relentless. And so he says, "Okay, one more little canoe ride." And they get out there, and they have their life jackets on, and they're paddling by, and he's sitting at a picnic table, and his little 5-year-old is there coloring her coloring book. The canoe upsets, and they're only 3 or 4 feet off the shore. But of course, the dad goes running up a little bit closer to the shore. The neighbors go out, and they make sure the boys are all right. And in that 2 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes max, when he turns around and comes back, his little daughter is gone. It turns out she's been kidnapped, and they get the authorities involved and fast enough that they're able to track this guy to this shack, this little shack way out in the woods, in the middle of nowhere. But unfortunately, they're still too late. Is all they find is a lot of blood and clothes, and they never find the little girl. Now, they were a very spiritual family and religious family, and from childhood, Nan, his wife, always referred to God as Papa. And even though he never really got into that much, he was spiritual and he went to church. Mac went to church on a regular basis, but now he's angry at God. his pain is so much. And this is what the author tries. If we live in so much pain, after a while we forget what it's like to live with love. We even don't even try anymore. It's like that bird that's in a cage. It doesn't even try to fly out anymore. It's been so trained to live in agony. And one day there's an ice storm, and even though he shouldn't be bothering, typical male, he decides he's going to get to that mailbox, hell or high water, and he slips and he slides down the driveway, hanging onto trees and fence posts, and he gets to the mailbox, and there's a letter in there. He puts it in his pocket, and he slips and slides his way back to the point. I think he crawls on his hands and knees the last 10 feet. It's so bad out. So his wife calls and says she's not coming home because it's too dangerous. She's going to stay at her parents' or wherever she is. And he opens this envelope, and it's an invitation to return to the shack, and it's signed Papa. And he says, this is ludicrous. You know, only a handful of people know that his wife refers to God as Papa. And who would be so cruel as to do this? I mean, could it be God Self that made this invitation? So, long and short, he heads out to the shack, and he goes through the bush, and he finds it, and he parks the car, and he walks through the snow. The snow is still a little bit deep, and he gets to the porch, and they're singing inside, and the door opens, and a big black woman comes out and embraces him like she's known him forever in his life, and invites him in, and he comes in. And the shack is marvelous inside, and he goes in, and she's talking to him, and how are you, and I hope you had a good trip, and then he hears footsteps behind him, and there's a gentleman with an apron on, a woodworking apron on, and he's not necessarily a very handsome gentleman at all, and she says, this is Jesus, and there's another woman there, and this is Saraya, and so he's introduced, and he catches on that this is probably God. And he's saying, am I insane? And he's wondering what's going on. And so anyways, he goes out, and God says, well, you know, you can do what you want. There's 3 canoes down by the lake. Go canoeing. You can go. There's a beautiful path in the bush. Fishing rod along the door. But if you catch fish, you got to clean them. I'll be happy to cook them. Go and with Jesus into the barn. He's working on some stuff. What would you like to do? And he's outside on the porch, and he's thinking, and he's talking to Jesus, and he's angry at God. He's really angry at God. But he wants to get this off his chest. So he's in there, and he's talking, and one of the first conversations that comes up, of course, is, as any of us, God is a black woman? He says, this concept is so hard for me to really relate to you as God when I see you dressed as a black woman. And she says, you know, that's the whole problem with humanity. You know, you put me in such a box. You restrain me to your own human concepts. And most of us really see God as the best we could be. That's our God. We have made God in our own image rather than try and become God's image. And so he's struggling with this concept of God being a black woman and relating to God. And the other issue God brings up, Papa brings up, he keeps calling God Papa even though she's a black woman, is that, you know, you had such a terrible relationship with your father. I knew if I came as a male, you would never be able to relate to me because you have such an anger towards your own father already. So how would you relate to me when you're already angry at me? So that's one of the first challenges this book brings to us is, why do we limit God to our own concept of some, you know, champion of whatever, rather than let God be one with us in our life and we become one with God, just have a natural relationship. So there's more to it than that, and there's a whole series of conversations with God. And then he breaks off and he goes and he has a visit with Jesus. And he's still angry with God. And one of the first questions to Jesus is, aren't you angry at God for allowing you to die and having abandoned? You even say, why have you forsaken me? And Jesus helps him understand that life is sometimes not always what we want it to be. But that when we completely fulfill our mission in life, as painful as it is, God is so rewarding. Being in this relation with God makes it all worth it. God didn't want Jesus to die on the cross. Remember, it was humanity that put Christ on the cross, not God. But Christ was willing to take any sacrifice he needed to be in constant relationship with God. Christ was not going to risk stepping out of line with this perfect relationship. And that was another point he starts to bring up. Max says, I can't believe the relationship you, God, and Sarah have. He said, I envy. It seems like you move together and you're always in tune with each other. And is it that you're always doing what God tells you? Like, isn't that boring? And Christ says, no. We don't have a hierarchy among us. A hierarchy was developed by humanity. And the author suggests that it was at the eating of the apple and before the eating of the apple, Adam and Eve were one with God. And it was only after that a hierarchy began where man started to think they were above women. And then as the world goes, we somehow think that the world would not work right if we didn't have people that were above us and in charge of us. And Christ says,